Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Mental Health and Wellbeing Summit. My name is Dr. Simone Collins, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Director of Outreach for UHS Mental Health Services. The workshops and activities throughout this event were created to help you attend to and take care of your mental and physical health. So thank you for taking time to prioritize your self-care with us today. I am pleased to be moderating this event's keynote address, Developing Your Mental Health Training Plan with Dr. Joy Harden Bradford. Thanks to our professional interpreting enterprise, whose staff are providing interpretation and captioning throughout the summit, and to the Wisconsin Union Campus Event Services for producing this event. If you would like to use captioning, please click the close captioning button on the bottom right of your window. If we have time at the end of the presentation after a Q&A with one of our student leaders, we will invite you to enter questions also using the Q&A function at the bottom of your window. Before we continue, I want to invite us to take a moment to reflect on the land on which we currently reside. If you are in Madison, like I am right now, we are guests on the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk Nation. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths every day. Tonight's speaker, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford, is a licensed psychologist, speaker, and the host of the wildly popular mental health podcast, Therapy for Black Girls. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Xavier University of Louisiana, her master's degree in vocational rehabilitation counseling from Arkansas State, and her PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Georgia. Her work focuses on making mental health topics more relevant and accessible for Black women, and she specializes in creating spaces for Black women to have fuller and healthier relationships with themselves and others. She's been featured in O, the Oprah Magazine, Bustle, Huffington Post, Black Enterprise, Women's Health, BuzzFeed, Teen Vogue, and Essence. Dr. Joy lives in Atlanta, Georgia with her husband and 2 sons. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joy Harden Bradford.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Simone. I really appreciate it. Well, I am super excited to be with you all this evening. Very, very pleased to have been invited to do your inaugural keynote address. I do hope that you all are doing your very best to take good care of yourselves in what we find a continuing difficult period. This week we have been talking a lot about anniversary reactions. So this week you may be getting notifications on Facebook or Instagram from your memories that this time last year, life maybe looked very different, right? And so I think it is important that we be mindful of how grief can sometimes sneak up on us given the past year that we've had. So if you're feeling a little bit more irritable this week, a little less productive, moving a little slower, it is very likely that you're having maybe somewhat of an anniversary reaction. So I do encourage you to be super gentle and kind with yourself this week, especially as we continue to move through these very difficult times. So tonight, I want to talk with you a little bit about developing your mental health training plan. So I have a presentation I want to share with you. All right. So, if there's anyone who is joining us this evening who has run a marathon or trained very seriously for any kind of competition, you will know that there are lots of things that you need to do to get ready for the competition or for the marathon, right? You don't just wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to run a marathon next week. Well, most people don't, right? There are things you need to think about in terms of training. You need to extend your runs a little longer. You need to pay attention to your hydration, what kinds of shoes you're going to be wearing, all of these things. And so those kinds of things take preparation and planning. And just like anything else in our lives that we want to tend to and want to be serious about, our mental health is the same. There are things that we want to be paying attention to now so that we can continue to nurture our mental health and take as good care of ourselves as we possibly can. So tonight, I just want to highlight a few of those things. By no means is this meant to be exhaustive. There are tons and tons of different things that we can do to, try to optimize our mental health, but this is just a few things, I wanted to highlight a few things to help you to think about it and to get you started on this path. So the first one is to tame your thoughts. And I am a huge fan of acronyms, so we will be spelling out the word train, TRAIN tonight. So the very first one is taming your thoughts. So a large part of managing our mental health is really paying attention to the thoughts and how our thoughts drive our emotions and our behaviors. And a lot of times our brain is spot on, right? The brain is really an incredible part of our body. And so most times it is making connections between things and allowing us to make decisions sometimes before we even recognize it. But sometimes what happens is that our brain connects things that they're not actually connected. And it causes us to make assumptions about things that aren't actually accurate. And a lot of times what happens is we call these cognitive distortions. And so one of my favorite, and maybe yours, cognitive distortions is overthinking. And so overthinking can be really harmful because it typically results in us being really overly critical of ourselves. And it keeps us from being focused, and it keeps us focused on unfavorable and negative outcomes, mostly about ourselves. And so I can't see your chat right now, but if we have time later and we have some time to discuss it, I'd love to hear if this is something that you find yourself falling into. I think it is something that a lot of people have discovered they lean on, or, it's a way that they kind of cope with things, is overthinking. And so if you're wondering if this might be you, maybe this meme will help you to know whether this is something you recognize yourself in. So this is the dark Kermit meme you may be familiar with, right? So one Kermit says to the other, I need to stop overthinking things. The other Kermit says, let's examine the infinite possible ways that this situation could have gotten worse and freak out about it, right? And so, for a lot of people, we get into this overthinking and really making up these grand stories that when you think about it, it's like, how did I even get here? So something that may be familiar to you, let's say you have a best friend and you text them in the morning, and this is somebody who typically will respond very quickly, right, when you text, but you text them one morning and you don't hear from them for hours, maybe even until the next day. For a lot of people, what will happen is that you will think, oh my gosh, they're mad at me. I must have done something wrong, right? Or you will make up these incredibly grandiose stories about what may be happening, as opposed to, could there be some other ideas about what's happening? Or let's say that you have an argument with your romantic partner or somebody you're kind of casually seeing. Instead of letting it just be a disagreement that always happens, we're human, so we don't always agree on things. Instead of it just being a disagreement that passes, you then start to running down all of the things that have happened. This person doesn't like me anymore. When I see them next, this is what I'm going to say, and then this is what they're going to say, and they're going to say this, and I'm going to say that, right? So just your mind is going a mile a minute, and you're thinking of all of the different ways that this next interaction how that might go when you see this person. Those are both examples of overthinking. And one of the very best ways that I have found, and that I talk with students all the time about, and with my own clients about, one of the best ways to manage some of that overthinking is by playing detective. So you want to play detective with the thoughts that you're holding on to, right? So if we take the example of your best friend who has not texted you back, even though typically they're super responsive, this time they haven't. So instead of going a mile a minute and thinking of all of the unfortunate things that may be resulting in them not texting you, what actually could be happening, right? The person could have fallen asleep. The person's phone could be uncharged and they're not close to their charger. They may have, and this is something I'm guilty of, they may have actually responded to the text in their heads, but did not actually hit send on the text, right? There are tons and tons of different reasons why somebody might not have texted you back that don't have anything to do with them being angry with you or anything about you at all. But when you are somebody who overthinks, that is where you go. And so playing detective really means actually writing out on with pen and paper or using the notes app from your phone and writing down all of the reasons why this person might not have texted you instead of they're just angry with me. So you want to do that anytime you have one of those thoughts that you can't, it just won't let you go. You want to play detective with that thought. Like, okay, let me see if I actually have any evidence to support what this is that I'm trying to hold on to. Another way that you want to look at taming your thoughts is through these thoughts that sometimes pop up, leaving us feeling like there are certain rooms that we don't belong in. So you may have heard this term called the imposter syndrome, right? And the imposter syndrome is this idea that at any moment, somebody is going to tap you on the shoulder and say, you know, that promotion that you got or that grad school acceptance that you got, you actually weren't qualified for that. That was a mistake. You're going to have to leave now, right? And so it leaves us sometimes feeling as though we have not earned the things that are happening to us. So maybe it was luck, maybe it was something else, but it is not actually about us doing the things that we have often done to be there. And so one of the ways that I like to, that I practice myself and share with other people, one of the ways to combat imposter syndrome is to make yourself a file either on your computer or on your phone, and you have to give it a good name. So the name of my file is called Girl, You Did That, right? And the file is where I put anytime I get any kind of an award or when somebody sends me an email about how much they loved one of my podcast episodes, anything that will help me on those days when I'm feeling like, oh, I don't really know if my voice matters or is anybody ever really paying attention. This file is where you can go to get all of the evidence that suggests you're not actually an imposter. You deserve to be in the spaces that you find yourself. So if you are on social media, not right now, but afterwards, if you're on social media later this week, I want you to send me a text, and I'm at hello, not text, a tweet. I'm at hello Dr. Joy on Twitter, and I want you to let me know what the name of your file is, because I do think it is helpful to have some place where you can go to when you just need a boost, when you need to be reminded of you are that girl, or you are that guy, or you are that person, so that when you need that boost, you can easily go back to this file and remind yourself of where you are. So the R of our mental health training program is a reliable support system. And so my psych majors or psych faculty on the chat will know what I'm talking about here. So in psychology, in order for a test to be reliable, it has to measure what it says it's going to measure over and over again, right? So for example, if somebody's developing a test to measure anxiety, but what you find is that it actually is depression, then that test is not going to be reliable. Or if the test only measures depression 20% of the time, then that test is not going to be reliable. And so when we're thinking about reliability in terms of our support system, we want to think about those same things. Is our support system consistent? And does it show up for us over and over again? And do they do the kinds of things they say they are going to do? So are they showing up for you when they say they are, when they say they will? Is it reciprocal, right? Are they texting you just as much as you're texting them? Are they sending you care packages and you're doing other things? is your support system actually there for you and doing the kinds of things that make you feel supported? So you may have heard of something called the 5 love languages. There are different love languages. You can have this for romantic partners, but also in relationships with your siblings, with your parents, and also in your friendships. And so in terms of your support system being reliable, you want to be showing support to the people in your system and having that done to you in the language that you actually recognize. So if your love language is gift giving, then that is the way that you are going to recognize that from your friends. And it doesn't have to be gift giving in terms of huge, expensive gifts. It could just be, a cup of hot chocolate or a hot coffee or something like that. But everybody has a different love language. And so you want to get to know what the love language is of your friends so that you can give and receive love in those ways. I think it's also important to think about when we think about consistency, that people are showing up when they say they're going to, right? So I think we have to have a little bit of a caveat though when we're thinking about the pandemic, right? So I think a lot of people have felt some tension in their friendships because they anticipated that their friends would show up for them in one way during this time, and they haven't been able to do that. And I think it's important to remember that there is no handbook for how to get through a pandemic, and we are all just doing the very best that we can. And so I think it's important to give people grace right now. But typically, you do want to have a rhythm in your friendships where other people are showing up for you and you are doing the same for them. When we're thinking about our friendships, I also think that it's really important to make sure that the friendship is growing at the same rate, right? So sometimes we find ourselves in friendships only because there's been a history. So somebody maybe you've been friends with since kindergarten, but the friendship isn't really reciprocal anymore. You don't really have a lot in common, but you are maybe not wanting to let go of that friendship because you've been friends for a long time. And while history is important and it can be really critical in friendships and in relationships, it's not the only thing that will keep a relationship healthy. And so I think it is good to, every now and then kind of assess where your friendships are. Do you feel like your support system is actually showing up for you? And are you actually allowing your support system to show up for you? So a lot of times, especially when we find ourselves to be the strong one in the group, it is really difficult for us to ask for help. And so you may have a support system around you, but you're actually not relying on them. And so I think it is good to get into the practice of actually asking for help when you feel like you need it, as opposed to just thinking that people will read your mind and know that you need help, right? I think when we do that, and we often do, I am guilty of it as well, we think that people will just know, like, hey, I brought them to the airport, twice last year. And so when I need a ride to the airport, I know they will just bring me. But you are actually much more likely to get what you need and want in relationships if you actually ask for it, as opposed to just waiting and assuming that people will know. So the R in your mental health training program is to make sure that you have a reliable support system. The A is an ability to cope. And I think this is, again, something that we have seen that we have done maybe an okay amount this year and maybe could use some work. And so when we're talking about an ability to cope, we're talking about what kinds of things we turn to when we are experiencing difficult times. So for some of us, that may be shopping. For some of us, that may be drinking. For some of us, that may be gambling. That may be sleeping, right? There are tons of different ways that we sometimes show up to be able to support ourselves when we're struggling with difficult things. And though those things may be okay in moderation, anything that we do too much of has a tendency to be unhealthy. And so some other coping strategies that we might want to consider are things like journaling, or things like meditation and mindfulness. And I think sometimes when we hear meditation and mindfulness, we think it has to be like a huge practice and I have to sit in a certain position and the room needs to be dark and quiet and all of those things, when really you can engage in a practice of mindfulness by just looking around your room and finding all of the items that are white, or just closing your eyes and paying attention to how many times the clock ticks, right? All of those things where you are just engaging your senses and focusing on the current moment any of that can be meditation and mindfulness. So don't think it has to be this extreme kind of practice. It is just you slowing down and taking a moment for yourself. And so one of the other things that we want to learn to do is when we are stressed, what kinds of things are we turning to? Like I said, so if there are some things that you're leaning on that may feel okay in the moment, but then you realize like, oh yeah, that doesn't feel great, right? So one thing that a lot of us will do is like, you know what, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm just gonna lay down and take a nap, right? And in the moment, it may feel like, oh yes, I'm resting myself and I'm doing what I need to do. But if it is really you procrastinating or not wanting to deal with whatever the situation is, then that may not be the healthiest coping strategy in that moment. So again, some of the things like I mentioned in terms of journaling, mindfulness, getting out into nature if you can do that safely. Spring, thankfully, is starting again soon. The weather's already getting a little nicer here in Atlanta. Hopefully it'll be nice where you are too. And so even getting outside for 10 or 15 minutes and letting the sunshine hit you can do a world of good for your mood. And so all of these are things that you can use to be able to cope when things get difficult. Another excellent strategy that I really enjoy in terms of coping is connecting with something that you loved doing when you were a child. And so for me, that is hula hooping. And so I'm not talking about these like new fancy hula hoops they have with water and they're weighted and all of these things. I'm talking about the old school ones where you can hear the ball move when you twist it around you, right? And so I have a hula hoop. And so when I am feeling overwhelmed, I will just break it out in the middle of the living room and give it a spin for a little while. And I'd encourage you to think about what kinds of things you enjoy doing from childhood. So maybe that was hula hooping, maybe it was playing jacks or basketball or coloring. Coloring books are making a huge comeback at this point, coloring books for adults, or even the ones for childhood will work too. What kinds of things did you enjoy doing as a child? Sometimes tapping back into that really helps to moderate any difficult feelings or emotions that you're having. So that's something else that I would encourage you to try. The I from our training program is insight about yourself. And so you really want to have a good idea of what kinds of things light you up in life and what kinds of things really make you tick. And a great way to do that is to kind of get involved in different organizations or opportunities on campus or even off campus to find what kinds of things really speak to you. That can give you just great input about how you're going to handle situations, how you want to show up in the world, how you might focus your career or job opportunities. All of these things can be really helpful in terms of you gaining insight about yourself. And the other thing, when we're thinking about insight, is we also want to have insight into our traumas, right? And so, just as a function of being human, sometimes there have been traumatic experiences in our lives, either with a big T or a little T, right? Even just this past year, I think many of us have been through a series of traumatic experiences. And so, when I'm talking about insight about ourselves, I'm also talking about how do our traumas show up in our lives, in our relationships with other people? And sometimes other people are the ones who can recognize that before we even do. And so you let me know, well, you can't let me know, but maybe we can talk about it later. Sometimes if you've had this situation where you will have a conversation with a family member or a friend and something is said and then their reaction is extreme, right? So it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Like we were just talking about, maybe grabbing a bite to eat this weekend, and then their reaction is like huge. And so anytime you see a reaction like that, it usually means that they're reacting to something else and not in the present moment. And so that can happen with other people, but it can also happen with us. So anytime you notice yourself having a reaction that feels disproportionate to whatever happened, that may be the source of a wound there, right? There may be some trauma there that has not been attended to and can be a great place for you to do some work. And so when you're thinking about like processing or working through traumatic experiences, therapy, of course, can be a great space to do that. But there are also tons of different self-help tools, including books and podcasts and YouTube videos that you definitely want to vet to make sure you're getting information from accurate and good sources. But there are tons of resources out there for you to be able to do some of that work on your own. But also journaling, I think, can be a really, really great way for us to get in touch with how we are actually feeling and just slowing ourselves down. Sometimes we are going from thing to thing to thing, and we don't actually take time to check in with how am I really feeling in this moment? Is there something that I need? What have I been thinking about? And sometimes when you journal, especially if you do it on a regular basis, you can track patterns in your mood or things that are going on for you. And so journaling, I think, is an excellent way for you to get some insight about yourself, but also maybe starting to work through any traumatic experiences that you've had. And then our N. Our N is a non toxic relationship with social media. And I feel like this one gets bigger and bigger every year because social media has become such a big part of our lives. And so you may notice that you will say, oh, let me just check out this one thing on Instagram or TikTok. And you look up 2 hours later and you're like, where has the time gone? Right. And so when we're thinking about a non toxic relationship with social media, we want to think about all of the ways that, yes, social media can be great for us, but all of the ways that it can also negatively impact our mental health. And so, one of the ways that this happens a lot, especially for younger people, is through comparison, right? So, you will start scrolling and you see people, and it looks like, oh, they're on a great vacation. Their vacations always look so much better than mine. Or, oh, they took the perfect selfie. Or look how happy their family is, right? And you know for yourself, it likely takes you no less than 10 pictures before you find the picture that you're going to put on Instagram, right? But when we are looking at other people's things, we don't think about the fact that they have chosen the best one. We just see the finished product. And so it's important to remind yourself that any accounts that you're following that make you feel not as pretty, not as successful, not as great of a parent, not as whatever, you probably want to go ahead and unfollow or at the very least mute those accounts because it is likely seeping into your thoughts about yourself. And that is just not something that we want to have happen. You also want to be mindful of how much time you're actually spending on social media. So again, sometimes you look up and it has been 2 hours and you don't know what else you could be using that time for, right? So when we look at productivity and our motivation, sometimes a lot of that is wasted in playing on social media because I'm not sure, well, probably you have heard about some of this, but a lot of social media platforms, we are the product, right? If you're not paying for something, then you are the product. You probably heard that. And so a lot of them are set up to kind of keep us sucked in and, in their systems in as for as long as possible. And so if you're not being attentive and mindful about how you're using it, you can really lose a lot of time there. Especially in the past year with, more instances of police violence and lots of, people sharing about death and harm and tragedy. You have to be careful of consuming information on social media because you can experience a vicarious trauma, is what we call it, almost as if you were at the scene of this tragic thing happening. And so I typically recommend that people turn off what is it called, autoplay on your Twitter and Instagram feed so that videos don't automatically start by themselves, because before you know it, you're watching somebody die on Instagram before you even knew what was happening. And so just be mindful of those things and be very careful of how much time you're actually spending there so that you are not, losing time that could be better used somewhere else. The new term that came up this year that was not in existence before this year is doom scrolling. And so that is also related to social media and the news, right? So when we are just looking for information and wanting to get answers, sometimes because things are unclear, we will be doom scrolling. And doom scrolling is, like you're feeling really bad and you're feeling like, okay, if I just scroll enough, I'll get enough information to help me feel better, but you don't actually feel better because there is no light necessarily at the end of the tunnel. And so that's something else that you want to be mindful for. Like there is a point at which you become overwhelmed with information, so it's fine to check like your reputable news sources for information related to vaccines or whatever is going on. But when you do too much scrolling through the news, you can become flooded with that information. And instead of making you less anxious, it actually makes you more anxious. So again, that is something to be mindful of. The final thing that I will say related to social media is that a lot of us want to use our phones and things to kind of capture moments, right? So I want to get the perfect picture of this moment so that I can remember this. But actually, there's been research that suggests that we remember things less when we take pictures with our phones. And so I just encourage you to, again, be mindful in how you're using your devices and put the phones down when you can and actually live in your life as opposed to always wanting to document your life for others instead of for yourselves. So that was all I have for you this evening, but would love to entertain any questions that you have as a follow-up. And I know Nyla has some questions as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Joy. And so Nyla, I'm just going to give you a second to get situated and then introduce yourself and share a couple of questions for Dr. Joy.
Yes, so hello everyone. My name is Nala McWhorter. I'm a junior here studying marketing, and I'm also the president of the Wisconsin Black Student Union. And I'm super, super happy and blessed to have this opportunity to do a Q&A with you, Dr. Joy. It seems like everything comes full circle around this time last year. One of my really good friends, Stephanie, shout out Stephanie, told me about your podcast because I was going through, a pretty rough time in my life around this time last year. And I just want to say it helped a lot, and it really brought a lot of insight into just how I look at myself and how I look at situations. So super excited to do this Q&A. I have a few questions of my own, but I'm also going to let everyone know there's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please drop questions if you have them for Dr. Joy. But to get us started, one of the questions was about this idea of being the strong Black woman, and how that can kind of, take a toll on us. So what is your take on the topic of being a strong Black woman in terms of mental health and societal influence?
That's a really good question. We talk a lot about that on the podcast. You probably have heard. But this whole idea of Black women having to be strong, like I don't think that there's anything wrong with strength, but there is a point at which that becomes a detriment, right? Because when people always see you as strong, then sometimes we buy into that for ourselves, and that means that there's no opportunity to fall apart, right? And so it's fine to be strong, but we're also human, right? Which means that we have limitations, we have weaknesses, we have areas where we're not shining all the time as well. And so I think instead of fully buying into this strong Black woman trope, we also have to learn to embrace softness, right? And to embrace our frailty in the areas where we are not doing so well. And I think that, other people outside of the Black community sometimes buy into this trope as a way to mistreat us, right? But, you even see this showing up in medicine, right? So there's research that talks about, Black women not being able to get the same levels of pain medication because it's assumed that we can just withstand pain at a rate that's higher than other people. And so we do have to be really careful of this strong Black woman trope. It came from history because people had to be strong to survive, right? And so I think, like most things, it was useful and helpful at one point in our lives, in our history, but at this point it probably is doing us more harm. And so I think we do have to be mindful of not buying into this idea and not expecting ourselves and each other, quite frankly, to always be strong, because we are human, we're not robots.
Yes, I love that. And that's something that I feel like we all will kind of learn, along the way. But for some of us students, we're kind of like getting into our first glimpse of wellness and mental health and, going through a pandemic. So what's one thing that you wish you had known about mental health when you were a student?
Ooh. Oh my gosh, now you're taking me way back, Nyla. So I'm gonna have to remember. I think one thing that I would have wished was that I didn't, not necessarily directly connected to the strong Black woman trope, but I feel like I was a bit of a perfectionist in undergrad, right? So this idea that I had to like get the best grades, I had to be involved in all the things, I had to get the great internship and all of those things. And while some of that is important, you have to look at the cost of that too, so that means time lost in terms of sleep, probably time lost of spending time with friends. And it's just not realistic, right? Like perfection doesn't exist for us as people. There is no perfect. And so I think really embracing good enough is something that I wish I would have known as an undergrad, as well as what it looked like to give myself grace. And so when I'm talking about giving myself grace, that means being okay and gentle with my mistakes, just like I'm gentle and, kind with other people when they make mistakes.
Yes. So kind of going off, I had mentioned, like the pandemic and this crazy time that we're going through. So what are some things that you would recommend for overcoming traumas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, the deeper we get into this, I think, and, my concern is that, yes, mental health has definitely been impacted throughout this, but I think that mental health will also be impacted on the other side of this, because I think that there will be a huge readjustment in terms of like, what does the world look like when we aren't all, kind of still staying in our houses? I think masks will likely continue for some time, but I think there will be a huge readjustment to us kind of coming out on the other side of this. So in terms of like really helping yourself to kind of moderate any trauma that you might be experiencing, I think it's really, really important to make sure that you're talking to people about how you're feeling. I think one thing that I have been pleased with, that we have kind of, made lemonade out of lemons in this past year, is that people have not had the bandwidth to keep up this "I'm okay" facade that a lot of us will have, right? Like I think people just are, have just really just been so stressed out that it's easier for people to say, you know what, I'm really struggling, because all of us are, right? Like honestly, we are a year into this, and so I don't know anybody really who is operating at 100%. And so I think it is good to be able to talk with one another about how we're feeling and be honest. And I also think, going back to the conversation around giving yourself grace, you have to understand that this may not have been your best academic year. This may not have been your best year as a faculty member, right? Again, we are just all doing the very best that we can. And so I think giving yourself grace and giving grace to other people is going to be really important right now. And planning for something pleasurable in the future, right? So I think that is a good thing to be thinking about, like, what's the thing that I really love to do when it's safe to do something, right? So whether that be travel or visiting with family members, like having things to look forward to is actually really good for our mental health. So I think that that's something I'd encourage as well.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up talking to people and just being transparent about how you felt. And earlier you also talked about journaling, and that's something that's really healthy and can help you find insight about yourself. So one of the questions is, what's one of your favorite journal prompts?
Ooh, one of my favorites is "Today I am feeling" and "Today I need." So just kind of giving yourself the free space to write on those, I think can be really helpful. I also really enjoy gratitude journaling. So gratitude journaling is you just kind of sharing a couple of things that you're grateful for every morning or evening. And they can be small things, right? Like today I had a chocolate ice cream cone, or today I got to play basketball with my kids, right? Just anything that can help you to kind of stay focused on, like, yes, there may be some really difficult things happening, but there are also things that I still feel grateful for. And so focusing on a place of gratitude can really improve your mood or help to stabilize your mood. So I encourage people to do that as well.
Yes. And then the last question from me before we open it up um, in the Q&A box is, what does self-care look like for you?
So self-care for me looks like Netflix binging. So finding the newest things to watch. I also try to, I have been experimenting with not sleeping in the room with my phone, because I was one of those people who was like waking up in the middle of the night, like scrolling Twitter, right? And that's just not good. It doesn't help you to fall back asleep when you like activate yourself by playing on the phone. So that has also been really good for me. And gratitude journaling. That's a part of my self-care regimen as well. And going outside, like I mentioned, the weather is getting a little better. So getting outside for a little bit is really helpful for me.
Yes, I love getting sunlight. Wisconsin hasn't been giving us too much.
It's coming.
Yes. So we have some questions in the chat box. Our first question is, what tips and ideas do you have to hold yourself accountable to follow these ideas/training plan? And they said, I often find myself trying to be more mindful or spend time journaling, but then fall out of practice after a few weeks.
This is such a good question. And so I think it is really important. You will probably hear me say this over and over about the grace, right? Because it's called a practice for a reason, right? So it is not something that you are going to be perfect at. There are going to be days where you're just like, I just don't have it, and that's fine, right? But it is really more about like, how can I do this more often than not? And on those days when you don't, then not beating yourself up about it, right? So if it's and I think something else that happens is that we try to change too many things at once, right? So I want to sleep better, I want to eat better, I want to be more mindful, I want to practice yoga, I want to do all these things, and usually you cannot like do all those things at once. So I'd encourage you to pick one thing that maybe you work on for a couple of months, and then when you have that kind of in a nice flow, then you add something else.
Yes, I love that. Next one is, they said, just by reading recent racist incidents, I think my mental health is affected negatively. How do I cope with this?
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of research, that talks about like the trauma related to racism, right? And so, Toni Morrison has this beautiful quote about the work of racism is kind of constantly making us doubt ourselves and explain things to people when really we could be using that time for other things. And so the trauma of racism is very real. So I first want you to hear that you are not making any of that up. If you feel worn down and exhausted and wanting to avoid the news because you're not sure what you're going to read, then that is very real. I'd encourage you to, like you're doing now, talk with people about how you're feeling. Be mindful of what you're reading and consuming in terms of the news, because sometimes it feels like we have to read that stuff so that we're like observing people's struggles, or we want to kind of pay reverence to it, but it actually can sometimes make us feel more anxious. And I'd encourage you to look at what small thing you can do to try to make a difference. So I think the other thing that happens with racism is that it makes us feel really helpless, right? Because it's like, how many times do we have to have the same speech? How many times do we have to march? How many times do we have to protest? How many letters should the editors do need to write? And it can leave us feeling really helpless. But what is a small thing that you can do to try to make a difference? So maybe that is doing something with kids in your neighborhood, or maybe that is checking on, maybe elderly members of your community, like looking at the small things that you can do and then encouraging your circle to do the small things that they can do to try to push things forward. But I first want you to hear that that is not all in your mind. It is a very real experience that you're having.
Okay, and these next two questions are kind of similar. So it says, what would you say to students who feel overwhelmed with all of their responsibilities, like full-time class, part-time jobs, studying, etc.? How can students find time for their mental health when they feel like they have no time? And then the next one just says, what things would you recommend when you feel overwhelmed and stressed?
Yeah, so if you are feeling overwhelmed and stressed, then that is your body indicating that it needs a break, right? And so looking at, is there something that you can take off your plate? And I know sometimes it feels difficult, right? Because if you are maybe supporting yourself through school, or you're working, because you need to kind of pay for tuition or whatever, it can be difficult to kind of look at like, is there anything that you can take off your plate? But sometimes there is, so can you take a lighter caseload? Can you do a better job of asking for help? You heard me say earlier, a lot of times when we are the strong one in the group, it's really difficult for us to say, hey, I'm really struggling, I need help here. So really taking an assessment of whether you are asking for enough help. Do you need to ask for extensions on assignments? I think especially this year, professors and faculty have been much more understanding of all the things that people are dealing with. And so asking for extensions if you feel like you need it, there's no shame in doing what you feel like you need to do to take care of yourself. I also think it's really important to really do hard resets when you can. So if you can take like one weekend and be disengaged from the world, right? So that might mean just locking yourself up in your room, no phone, no TV, and really a hard reset, kind of like a power down, like we do with our devices, sometimes that can be really helpful. You know, when we are in chronic stress situations like we have been for this past year, the things that we used to do like in February of 2020 might not be as effective as they are now because the stress has just continued to accumulate. And so sometimes we have to be a little bit more radical and drastic in our self-care. And that may look like a hard reset.
Yes. And then I know a little earlier you touched on grief. And that's something that a lot of people are experiencing right now. So one of the questions are, what are some things to remember while grieving?
So I think it is important to remember that grief is not, there's no timeline and it's not a one-time kind of thing. You heard me talk about like the anniversary reaction that comes with grief a lot of times. And also grief is not just related to us losing people that we love. Grief is also related to losing experiences that we were really hoping to have, or grieving the life that we thought we would have at this time, or for people who may be graduating, right? Like, this is what I thought my senior year would be, and it hasn't looked anything like that. And so we also grieve those things. And so it's important to kind of give yourself space to acknowledge, this is what I thought it was going to be, but this is what it really was. And I think for a lot of people, it has been hard to do that, especially this year, because so many people have died, right? And so when you think about that, it feels like, well, at least I'm alive. I can't complain. But yes, you can, right? Like, there's enough space for us to hold grief related to losing a loved one and grief related to losing your senior year or losing your, championship season, right? Like, there's enough space to hold all of those things. And so what I want people not to do is to feel like, oh, my grief doesn't matter, or, that's a silly thing, right? You still deserve to have space to process those feelings. I'd encourage you to do that with somebody you trust, maybe a friend or a therapist, so that you can actually give credit and give reverence to, the things that you've lost as well.
Yes, this next question is a super good question. They said, you mentioned reliable support systems earlier and how we catch ourselves in friendships because of longevity. How do you navigate some of those bittersweet realizations that a friendship is not growing on someone's end?
Those are difficult. Those are difficult because, I think on TV we see friendships in dramatic fashion, right? Like somebody, slept with somebody's boo or something, right? And the friendship ends. But truthfully, in real life, friendships most often end because they just fizzle out, right? Somebody, doesn't call back, and then you just realize it's been 3 months and nobody's talked. And so that can be really difficult conversations, because it doesn't have to mean that anything is wrong with you or with them. It can just be that y'all are going in different ways in your lives. And so I think if you can have a conversation with them about the distance that you see there, maybe there's an opportunity to kind of get it back on track. But it also can be saying goodbye in love, right? It can just be, this has been great, but it doesn't feel like there's much more to do in terms of us growing together. And so I wish you well. It doesn't have to be any animosity. We can still speak cordially when we see one another, but sometimes you just recognize that the relationship has run its course, and it is better to kind of say goodbye in love if you can, rather than letting it, kind of drizzle out, because then you have not said a proper goodbye. And if it has been a good relationship to you and a healthy one, it's good to mark those things with goodbyes.
Yes, the next one says, how do you take time to rest and not feel guilty when there's so much to do /fix/change? How is rest and self-care really an act of political warfare?
Yes. So I am quite far removed from the college experience. I graduated in 2000. And I can relatively accurately let you know that the work never stops, right? So 20 years plus from graduation, I can let you know that there will always be something to do. And so I think something, we have to think about like the way capitalism has really kind of socialize us into thinking that rest is something we have to earn. Rest is what we need. Like, when you think about self-care at its basic form, we need rest, right? Like, if we're not sleeping, then at some point our body's going to shut down on us. And so rest is not something that you have to earn. Like, that is just your right as a human. You need to rest so that you can keep getting up and functioning and doing what you need to do. And so when we think about it as an act of political warfare, if the system has beat us down so much that we are like up all night because we're anxious or we're planning and plotting on how we're going to take over the system, then the system really has won because we're not resting enough so that we can get up to fight another day, right? And so when we talk about rest being political warfare, that's what we're talking about, doing what we need to do to kind of take a step back, knowing that other people will still be in the fight to kind of keep it moving, but that sometimes we need to kind of remove ourselves so that we can do the work that we need to do so that we can show up again. But you do not need to earn rest. There will always be things to do. So, the guilt that you feel, guilt is not a super useful feeling, because usually what happens on the other side of guilt is that you feel shame, like what you're talking about, right? And so I think when you feel guilty about something, it is okay to acknowledge it, but then to say, how is it being productive? Right. So if I'm going to feel guilty, I might as well just go ahead and get the rest I need and then get up and feel refreshed and keep on doing whatever it is I need to do. But the to-do list never ends. So I think it's important to learn to rest and how to take care of yourself, even when there are a million things that have to be done.
This next question kind of goes back to the concept of friendships.
Mm-hmm.
They said, love the use of the acronym, Dr. Joy, train, brilliant. Can you talk a bit more about the reciprocity in one's friendships and how have you approached ending a friendship or letting them simply fade or confronting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I'm talking about reciprocity, I am talking about making sure that you're on equal playing ground, right? So you should not be the one that's always initiating conversations. You should not be the one who's always remembering birthdays and anniversaries, but the other person doesn't. You shouldn't be the one who's always sending gifts and the other person doesn't, right? You don't want to be in a one-sided relationship. So reciprocity means not that it has to be tit for tat, right? It doesn't have to be like, okay, I text you, you text me next time. But generally, do both people feel like they are getting what they need and want out of the relationship? That is reciprocity. I don't know that I have personally had any experiences with like ending friendships. Now, definitely, there are people who I was friends with like in undergrad, and then once you go to grad school, like you just don't necessarily talk anymore. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it was like an ending, but there are just kind of natural endings to the phases of our lives, where those people are not people that we're connected to anymore. But I think when we have relationships with somebody, and like we talked about, you recognize like, okay, something's happened here. What often happens is that we just don't say anything about it, right? And the rift either becomes bigger until like there's no way you can salvage it, or sometimes there's this huge explosion, kind of like we saw in last season of Insecure, right? So there's all these things that Molly and Issa are not saying to one another, and then they have this huge fight at the block party. And so I think when we can, it is important for us to practice having difficult conversations with one another. And nobody wants to do it, right? Like, who wants to have an awkward conversation? But most times what I find is that if you can say the thing, right? So however they hurt you, or if they offended you in some way, if you can say that, usually the relationship can get stronger after you've had an opportunity to have a conversation about it. But if you never say it, and then things just keep building and building, then you're doing more damage to the relationship than just kind of, getting yourself together and having the conversation. So that's what I would encourage people to do if they can, is to just kind of buckle up and have those difficult conversations, even if they're not perfect, because they won't be. But if you can, have the conversations with people, and then make a decision about whether it's a relationship that you want to continue with or not. Sometimes things happen in relationships and we can't come back from it, but sometimes we can. And so having those conversations, I think, is critical.
Love the Insecure reference. Can't wait. Can't wait for the last season. This is a really, really good question that also resonates with me a lot. Someone said, on the subject of trauma during the pandemic, I feel like I have been feeling numb a lot of the time for the past year to some of the awful stuff going on. Like a part of my brain has completely shut down so I can process the stress. How can I allow myself to feel my emotions? I don't want it to explode out when this is all over.
So that is incredibly insightful. Whoever you are sharing this, I really appreciate you sharing that here. Your reaction is completely normal, right? So a lot of times you've heard about fight or flight fight, flight, or freeze. So when traumatic situations happen, sometimes what we do is shut down. And so if you're saying that you feel numb to it, my guess is that that feels like an indication that your system is saying, I can't handle this right now. And so for that kind of a reaction, I wouldn't encourage you to try to do that on your own. I think talking with a therapist about how you're feeling and how you can kind of gradually open yourself up to kind of feeling some of what's happening. Because the other thing that happens when we're numb is that not only are we blocking ourselves from like the difficult emotions, we're also blocking ourselves from the joyful ones, right? And so when you're numb, you're not experiencing any of those things. And that's definitely not a place where you want to stay for a super long time. And so I'd encourage you to talk with a therapist. If you're on campus, I know Dr. Simone said that they also are offering virtual services if you're in Wisconsin, or if they can help you get connected to someone in your area if you're not in Wisconsin. But that's what I would encourage that person to do.
Yes, and then we have one more question and then we have to wrap up, unfortunately.
Mm.
But Stephanie said, can we discuss the mental health burden rejection can have and how to go about that?
The mental health burden rejection?
Can we discuss the mental health? Can we discuss the mental health burden rejection can have? Oh, the mental health burden that rejection can have. And
Oh,
how
like if you've been rejected from something. Oh, absolutely. I mean, rejection is a very difficult emotion to experience because we're wired as, we're social creatures. And so we want to be wanted and we want to be loved. That's a very human need for us. And so rejection doesn't feel easy. But I think it is important to recognize that rejection doesn't have to mean anything about us inherently, right? So sometimes we are rejected from an opportunity because we might not have been the best fit, or sometimes a relationship ends, right? Like, there's a breakup or something, and, we feel rejected. And so I think it's important to know that rejection is normal. Like it is a normal experience to have after something that you really wanted doesn't work out, but it doesn't have to mean that you are bad or unworthy. It can just mean that this thing didn't work out. And so I think that's where you kind of get into some difficulty when you think that it means there's something wrong with me, when most often there's nothing about you that's wrong. The situation just may not have been a good fit.
Yes, so that was our last question. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Joy, for answering people's questions, answering my questions. Much needed. I think during this time, we definitely needed to see a Black woman, especially as a speaker, but also someone who has went through these experiences and has the professional help. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it off to Dr. Simone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and like Nala said, thank you so much for being here tonight, Dr. Joy. And Nala, thank you so much for managing the Q&A for us. You did such a great job, so thank you. And also thank you to all of for everyone for attending tonight. Please visit the Summit website at wellbeingsummit.wis.edu for other events that we have going on throughout the day tomorrow, starting at 9 a.m. Central. You can join using the same Zoom link that you used tonight for all of the sessions except for the 9 a.m. and 12:05 yoga sessions, which you may then join by using the links on the Summit website. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's keynote address and that you will join us tomorrow. Have a good night, everyone.